you for being here again.
Oh, thank you. It's good to be here. This is
so
fun.
we'll kick it off right away. So you were one of the first employees at Zillow over 12 years ago. So can you talk to us a little bit about the early days? Kind of what were you hired to do and kind of how did that go?
Absolutely. So yeah, 12 years ago, I was living in San Francisco. And a couple people I knew, Spencer Raskoff, who's the CEO of Zillow today, he and I had worked together at Hotwire in San Francisco before then. He had since moved on. And he gave me a call in 2005 saying that he had partnered with Rich Barton, who had been the founder of Expedia, and they had this new idea for real estate. And would I be interested in moving to Seattle and being a part of this? And at first I said, gosh, that sounds so exciting, and these are two really brilliant people I knew, but there's no way I'm moving to Seattle. And they said, just come up here and talk to us. And I was thinking, okay, maybe I could like consult or something. And within an hour, they had me convinced to leave everything behind. I had a serious boyfriend, like everything behind, and move to Seattle and be on the ground floor of this new company that was going to do really interesting consumer things with real estate and homes. So I left everything and I moved. The good news behind that, just to tie that one off, is my boyfriend later followed me, and he's now my husband, and we have 2 kids. So the personal stuff worked out. But it's hard to imagine this, but if you think back just 12 years ago, if you were looking for a new place to live, whether to rent or to buy, there really was no information online. I mean, here we were in 2005, a good 15 years into the internet starting to revolutionize and democratize data and information. Yet in real estate, if you wanted to know what homes were worth, what homes are for sale, what's sold in the past, have there been price cuts, what's for rent, are there foreclosures in this area, things that today we sort of take for granted. Just 12 years ago, you could not find that information online. You had to pick up the phone and call someone. And much of this information is public data. But it was kind of locked up in county courthouses, and you physically had to go look it up. So we saw an opportunity there for consumers. And it was under that premise that we launched Zillow in early 2006, our first version of Zillow. And there was, a couple dozen of us working on it at the time. We had raised some money, but we had all sort of lived through that first internet boom and bust in the early 2000s, and we had witnessed companies and friends at companies go under for spending their funding on marketing or too much marketing in the early days. And we were convinced that wasn't going to happen to us. We didn't actually have a revenue model yet. We had a consumer idea, but we said we're going to make this round last, and we're going to figure out how to build a product that people love and drive an audience on no marketing spend. And that actually turned into 7 years of no marketing spend, but over time, quite a bit of growth.
That's fun as a CMO.
Yeah, right.
So what were kind of some of the biggest challenges that you've had over the years? Where are some areas that you've made mistakes?
Well, there's a story in the early days. I would call it a challenge, but I like to tell this story because I learned a lot about leadership from it, and I think it's a pretty extraordinary story for entrepreneurs. And that was around my first day. So I was running marketing of this new startup that didn't have a budget, but how was that was sort of portrayed to me is it was truly my first day. I was sitting at my desk and I was unpacking the box that had my computer in it. And Rich Barton, our founder, came over and he said, Amy, I have a goal for you. He said, I have a big, hairy, audacious goal that he likes to call BHAGs. And he said, by the time we launch Zillow.com, by the time we are 6 months live, I want you to be driving 1 million visitors a month to our website, and you can't spend any money doing it. And he kind of turned on his heel and walked away, and my jaw kind of dropped, and I thought, what the heck did I just do? Leaving everything behind, moving, this is impossible. But Rich is a really amazing entrepreneur, and he knows something about people, and he knows that if you can motivate and galvanize people around a mission that feels exciting, around a big idea, and you can hire great people, it's amazing the scrappy and creative things that people can do to meet those goals. So have a mission, hire great people, set really big, hairy, audacious goals, and then kind of set them free. So fast forward, we launched Zillow February 8th, 2006. We had our millionth visitor on day 3. and 5 million visitors that first month. And it's sort of been going ever since. Today we have 170 million visitors a month across all our brands.
Oh, wow. So you got those tips down. So what do you think are like the 2 or 3 most important things that entrepreneurs should focus on when building a company?
A couple different things. So in those early days when we tried to figure out how do we create a brand and a household name on no marketing spend, one thing we focused on very deeply was product, right? With the belief that the best marketing you can possibly do is build a product that people love and want to talk about. So when we spent money on hiring the best people we could hire to build that product and putting a lot of resources behind product. And I think that's something that, certainly everyone has ideas in the early days, but there is some thinking to be done around the product versus marketing trade-off, and to really deeply believe and understand that your product is the actual best marketing you can have. And not just in how you build it, but also how you understand the people you're building for. So one thing we did in the early days that's still really intrinsic to our culture today is we did research and we built what we called personas, right? People with actual names that within the company, this is who we build for. And we have a Beth, the buyer, and a Susan, the seller, and a Harriet, the homeowner, a Rachel, the renter. And we have posters around our office, and we had these 12 years ago, we have them today, of who these people are. And we continually do a lot of research and refine this so that every person in the company knows that Beth is 36 years old. Beth is married. Beth has this type, who the average Beth is, and what her needs are, and emotionally what's driving her, and what her annoyances are, and what she wants, so that you walk into any product meeting around the company and you're going to see developers and engineers sitting there saying, well, we know this about Beth, and we know she reacted to this product in this way, and Beth really wants this, and she is a real living human being that's a part of our lexicon and a part of who we build for. So that's kind of wrapped up in the product too. It's not just building cool things that you think are cool, but it's understanding who you're building for and really, really getting to know these people and championing them so that you can build a culture and an organization that pivots around them. So
all of your personas are women?
Well, in home shopping, people shop as couples, but women drive a lot of the decisions. So yeah, they are. We have other personas on the professional side that aren't women, in the agent and property manager side and investor side, but yeah.
Great. So kind of switching to kind of your COO role. So you're overseeing the corporate culture, the hiring and retention. So I think I've read that, Zillow has a mission-driven culture. So what does that mean, and kind of, can you explain a little bit more?
Yeah, so we have a mission, and it is something that everyone in the company knows very well, and it's to build the world's largest and most vibrant home-related marketplace. And it's something that we wrote in the early days, but we talk about it a lot. And if you ask any employee of our 3,000 employees throughout the company, what is Zillow Group's mission? They'll be able to recite this. Because we want people to really understand what is it we're trying to do. And there's lots of detail in what that means, right? There's sort of what we're doing today, what we're building for the future, what we're testing off on the side. But people need to understand why they're coming to work every day, and then they need to understand what's my part in this mission. So not just what's this company of 3,000 people doing, but how do I contribute to this mission on a daily basis? And that's something we drive really hard with our leaders and managers. We also have our own set of core values, which are behaviors and ways we work that contribute to that mission and that we believe are going to be really successful, or help us to be successful as a company and help us to be successful as individuals. And that's something we talk about a lot. And core values, or one of them is move fast, think big. What we mean by that, obviously we move fast even as we get bigger. We want to move at the pace of a startup. We keep our development teams small. We want to make sure that people can innovate and move things fast, and we don't sort of get caught up in corporate sloth as we get bigger. But the think big for us is something culturally that's really important. We want to encourage people to take big swings. The analogy here is that, it's a baseball analogy, is that you can go up to bat, okay, and you have one time up at bat, And the safe choice is you can bunt the ball and basically be guaranteed you go to first base, right? You're not going to strike out. That's a safe choice. Or you can step up to bat and you can just swing for the fences, right? And there's a good chance you're going to whiff it and completely miss the ball, but there's that little chance that you're going to blow it out of, over the fences and hit a home run. We think a lot and we execute a lot on how do we create the culture that encourages people to think big and swing for the fences. And to do that, we have to be okay with failure. It can't be something that we demonize. It has to be a culture where people take big swings, and if they strike out, you kind of dust yourself off and you go up to bat again, and we encourage that. That's something that structurally in my role as COO, when we were small and we talked about it a lot, it was very easy to talk about. As we get bigger, I try to figure out organizationally how do we create and encourage a culture that at all levels of the organization encourages people to work that way, to not make the safe choices. Because when we stop making safe choices, when we go up and we just bunt the ball, that's when someone's going to innovate around us, right? Sort of with our blinders on and we're not even going to see it.
Oh, that's really encouraging. That's great.
Yeah, it's something when I talk to companies that I think is just so important. The mission-driven culture, and then identifying those behaviors that you believe are going to help your employees and your leaders achieve that mission, and like writing them down and talking about them and making it a part of your conversations and lexicon every day is really important. And as you grow and scale, even more important, because it helps you to understand who are we and who do we want to be.
Is there any company in your mind that kind of stands out that you kind of want to emulate? Like, that's kind of what I want to build into my organization.
Yeah, there are definitely companies that have a strong culture, and sometimes it's on a positive note, and sometimes it's not so much on a positive note. So LinkedIn is a company that's known as having a really strong culture. On a very positive note, Apple has a very strong culture, but it is a pretty cutthroat culture. Amazon in Seattle, where we are, has a very cutthroat culture. And in fact, I love hiring people from Amazon, actually, because they come out of there and they're like really exhausted. And then like I can sell them on Zillow pretty quickly. But I think there are a lot of companies that you can see in their culture from the top down, and you can see it in the way they produce and lead their marketplaces. But I would posit that, on some it can be a negative connotation to that culture, but it is possible to have a really great and positive culture that feels great and then creates great work. And, in tech, sometimes we get caught up in some of the hardest driving, biggest risk-taking companies often don't have a good culture, right? If you've read anything lately about what's happening with Uber, that's like a perfect example, right? That's not sustainable, right? And that's not a place where the great people you hire are going to want to stick around. And you're always going to be looking for new people because people are churning out. So we really try to focus on how do we create a place that people come to work, can be doing the best work of their careers, love coming here, and just want to stick around a long time.
Is that kind of what the decision behind, is it the Z&G R&R package that's coming out now?
Yeah, so what that is just something we recently launched, a sabbatical program where after 6 years, people get 6 weeks off. And sort of every 6 years, we get 6 weeks off. The idea being like go travel, take a vacation, take some time off, recharge your brain, come back, and hopefully you're refreshed and can do some great work. If you come back, you might come back and say, I'm ready to move on, and like that's okay too. But most people come back and say, I'm ready. That break was great, and I'm ready to do this. But that's part of culturally, we want to be a place that people want to work for a very long time. And to do that, we have to do something that's pretty rare in tech, which is encourage work-life balance. Encourage people to take that time out of work to spend with their families and spend taking trips and spend just going home and being with their friends, because we want them to come back to work the next day refreshed and energized and excited to go take the big swings and take risks. And it's something that I think a lot of tech companies don't do. So culturally and aiming for that, then we try to build benefits that map to that. So things like our R&R, we have a really strong parental leave program where women get 4 paid months, men get 2 paid months, or any partner or spouse who didn't actually birth the baby gets 2 months. You get $1,000 baby bucks every time you have a baby, like we get all sorts of free backup child care and things that really support people in growing families. Again, so that people don't get burnt out. People want to come back to work. And I feel like that's something that often gets overlooked or is missing in tech.
Yeah, definitely. So kind of going back to that, obviously it's very top of mind with Uber, and even here locally, Magic Leap was recently accused of sexual harassment, and so we're seeing a lot of these kind of tech companies where, you know, it's being obvious that the corporate culture isn't as great as, you know, you would hope. So for entrepreneurs kind of starting their company now, what measures do you think can be put in place to make sure that from top down, from the start, you're kind of in a good place and you weed out any folks that kind of are against that culture? And
well, one of the things that tech companies tend to do is, you know, in those early days, you have to be so strategic in the hires you have, right? So you're going to hire people who can build things, and you're going to hire people who can market things. And the mistake that a lot of startups make is you don't prioritizing hiring HR, right? That sounds very like corporate, and it feels like, oh, we don't need that. We're just 10 or 20 people. But there's a point where you do need that. And in particular, you need a people-focused organization that, you know, you remember that you're not just about the product you build, but you're really about the people who are building that product. And if you lose this layer, you lose everything. So if you lose your ability to retain great people, you know, that's going to hurt you. If you become known as a place that's not good to work, you lose your ability to hire great people. And that people layer is something that I think often startups don't focus on enough in the early days, and they should, right? And you know, from everything I read about Uber, I've never been on the inside, but it's something that they've had tremendous, crazy growth over the last several years, and waited too long to invest in that layer, invest in a people-first organization, and you know, it's come back to hurt them in a number of ways.
Okay. So kind of switching back to business goals, and so now at the size you guys are, $1 billion in annual revenue, kind of what does business success look now? What's most important to you guys moving forward?
So today, what started as Zillow.com 12 years ago is Zillow Group, and we are a portfolio of real estate and home-related brands. Zillow, Trulia, Hot Pads, which is a rental site, Street Easy and Naked Apartments in New York. And so we're best known for real estate, and we derive most of our revenue from real estate agents who pay us for exposure on our sites and to connect with consumers. But that's actually a piece of what we do. It's the piece that drives most of our revenue, and it's the piece that funds experimentation and growth in a lot of different areas. So we have a growing rental marketplace. We have a mortgage marketplace. We have a number of things we're building for homeowners. And like the idea and the dream here is that we all live in homes. We all care very much about that emotional connection to where we live. We all dream very much about the changes or the improvements we want to make on that home or the next place we want to live. And we believe that people can and should and do interact with Zillow Group brands at every stage of their entire lifetime, right? So there is the time you're looking for your first rental apartment in your 20s. You're going to use Zillow or Trulia or Hot Pads for that search.
Yeah, your commercials always make me cry.
Right?
They're so good.
There's the first rental one. And then when you're a renter, you're kind of always looking because your lease is up for renegotiation every year. You may move a couple times. You start thinking about, might I want to buy? You become a buyer. You get a mortgage. You redecorate. Like, we have various marketplaces that touch people, and it's slowly sort of coming together as a consumer journey over an entire lifetime. But what we're most known for is usage in that period every 6 or 7 years when people buy or sell a new home. But there's sort of a lot going on in between the posts on that.
So how did kind of the mortgage crisis affect Zillow? And I know I'd read some articles that you almost leveraged it to kind of provide more data to folks. And
Yeah, it was an interesting time. So around the time Zillow launched was about a year before the housing market crashed, right? So in theory, a pretty terrible time to launch an unprofitable startup without a business model in real estate. It didn't seem so at the moment, right? Because in early 2006, home values are going up and up and up. It was a very frothy market, but within a year, everything completely crashed. And we noticed, and we found ourselves year one into our startup at kind of a crisis. Like, okay, we just launched a company built on the frothy, exciting question, find out what your home is worth and get excited about real estate. And we're getting all this traffic because it's such a positive thing. And like, holy crap, no one wants to know what their house is worth anymore, right? So what do we do? And one thing we noticed is that on the eve of the housing market crash, there were television commercials on TV put out by the National Association of Realtors saying there's never been a better time to buy, inducing consumers like, go buy. And we looked at that and we said, like, consumers aren't being told the truth. And here we have all this data on what's happening in the housing market. And we have really smart statistical people. We had economists on staff and researchers and statisticians and people who can make sense of this. So let's start telling people the truth. And we actually used PR as a vehicle for this, and we started putting out housing market reports on a monthly basis. We started with a handful of cities. Today we do it in 400 plus cities, down to the neighborhood level, where we said we're going to chart what's happening in this crisis. And it wasn't good news. It wasn't necessarily happy news. It wasn't necessarily a great thing when you got your Zillow email every month that said your home value has gone down another $20,000. But it was real news, and it was the truth. And it was actually in that crisis moment, through organic marketing, PR, email, social media, that we started to build that trust in our brand. And we started to build that connection with consumers where people understood, like, yeah, it may be bad news, but someone's telling me what's really happening out there. And we worked a lot with media, and we got a ton of PR, but we would say things in the real estate industry that at the time were controversial, which is, yeah, it's not a great time for everyone to buy. If you're thinking about buying, you need to think about staying in that home 10 years, and you need to make sure you have at least 20% for a down payment, no more mortgages with 0%, because the housing market's going to go down further. You're going to get underwater, and if you lose your job, you could go into foreclosure, right? And we were saying that to people when I think they weren't hearing it from other sources. And it actually, ended up for our brand being a really pivotal time that we did that. So we grew pretty substantially throughout the housing crisis. The housing crisis, just when we were coming out of it, we took the company public because we were quite successful and we were profitable at this time, and this was 2011. So it was good for us, and I think it was good for consumers.
yeah.
To hear from us now, of course, we're all happy that we're out of that. But I think what's helpful is we're in an era now where consumers are used to having data and information, and I think much more informed than they were a decade ago going into the housing crisis.
Which actually, so now flash forward to today, how do you see kind of technology affecting the real estate industry over the
Well, it's interesting. Within the real estate industry in the early years of Zillow, we were pretty misunderstood because we were coming in and democratizing data, and we had an internet-based model for real estate, and any other parallel we could draw that people could draw looked at things like travel, where a number of us were in the travel industry before Zillow, and travel websites were launched, and before this there were these travel agents, and they all sort of lost their jobs, and no one uses travel agents anymore. And even in recent examples of like Uber in the taxi industry or Airbnb in the hotel industry, disruption to people means eliminating human jobs in some way with the internet. And there was this idea that Zillow was going to do that, that we were going to eliminate the role of the real estate agent. But we didn't, and we weren't trying to, because something we learned very early on with our personas and our consumer data is that buying a home is really different than buying an airline ticket, right? People do this on average every 7 years. It is the most expensive, emotional, stressful transaction they're ever going to go through in their lifetimes. This is a big investment, and 90% of people are not going to do this on their own. People want to partner with real estate agents, but they want to find the best and most knowledgeable local ones to work with. And that's something that we focus a lot on helping with that connection. You know, that's something that also I think was really misunderstood. So, and now I'm forgetting what your original question was, but I guess
technology impacting it.
Yeah, so I think in this industry where technology has impacted change is in the democratization of data and empowering consumers to find out information on their own and connect with an agent when they're ready. So it used to be that when you wanted to know what homes were for sale, you picked up the phone and you called an agent and you said, open the MLS book and tell me what homes are for sale and tell me what I can afford. Today, what happens is people say, okay, let's think about, you know, do we think we might want to move? Well, let's go on Zillow or let's go on Trulia and let's understand what homes cost in the school district we're interested in and what's on the market and what's happening with home values and what's forecasted to happen with home values and what can I afford in a mortgage. And they do these months and months of shopping and information gathering, and then they say, okay, we're ready, let's find an agent. And they shop around for agents and they pick an agent, and then the agent helps them with the hardest part of all this, which is the transaction, especially in really competitive markets and in our big cities today where we're talking about multiple bidding situations. So there is this really strategic role for a real estate agent today. That role has changed though, because agents used to be sort of gatekeepers and negotiators, and today it's sort of strategic negotiators, and the information has been set free.
Okay. Yeah. So I want to open up to questions, but I'm going to ask you one more question. Okay. Because one thing I didn't mention in my bio of Amy is that she actually serves on the board of directors for 2 private companies, Hotel Tonight and Avo. Did I say
Avo?
Avo. So given that some of these entrepreneurs might be looking to bring on board of directors, kind of what's your suggestion, recommendation on how do you choose the right board of director to work with?
So with the boards I've joined them both at a stage where, you know, usually when startups first raise money, and if you get venture capital money, you often give a board seat to the investors. But there's a stage in those first couple years when you really want to think about, you know, the role of the board and how they can help you, and putting an operator on the board, right? Someone who's sort of been on the ground going through some of the things that you're going through, whether it's challenges with marketing, challenges with people, and, you know, things just as simple as, okay, we now have 50 employees. We got to start having annual reviews, right? How do we do that? Or how do we think about compensation, and how do we think about compensation and equity versus cash, and, you know, things that like operators have done. So that's something both the boards I joined as operators, an operator joining a board of investors. But I think that's something that probably most startups need and should think about in the early days. You know, for, I would say, in the early rounds, because the operating point of view, it's someone to just bounce ideas off as a CEO and founder.
So I guess I lied. One more question.
Okay.
So another part of her bio, fun fact, is Amy used to be a broadcast journalist for many major networks, CBS, NBC,
local
in Virginia and in Florida. So is there anything you felt that you learned then that's kind of you've been able to apply in your second life?
Actually, yeah. So I did do that. I did that for 4 years out of college. I was actually a journalism major, and it was something I always wanted to do, and then I started doing it, and I hated it. But what I did learn in it that I use a lot today is, number one, is this concept of like always being on deadline. You know, when I was a journalist, every day we had deadlines. We had to move fast. You came in, you did something entirely new. You finished it by the end of the day. You're always moving fast. And I think I just apply that all the time. I move fast. It's one of our core values at Zillow, move fast, and I think it's something that from an innovation standpoint is a great thing to have if you're just naturally inclined to move fast. But being a journalist also made me curious, and that's something I think that has served me well as an entrepreneur and a leader. That sometimes it's better to ask a lot of questions and sit back and listen than do a lot of talking. And so I'm good at asking a lot of questions, and I like to do that.
Nice, wonderful. All right, so I'm sure you guys have, I think we have one. Are you giving the mic around? Or? Oh, okay, perfect.
Thanks.
Cool. Hi.
Hey, great talk. Welcome
Thanks.
back to Florida.
Thank you.
So so did you buy Gridix or?
So we bought Street Easy,
Okay.
which is basically like a Zillow for New York City. Okay, it's focused just on Manhattan and Brooklyn. And Felipe was working. Where are you? Way back there. He was working at Street Easy at the time that we bought Street Easy a couple years ago, and then he later left and helped start Gridix.
Okay. So what metrics do you look at when you're acquiring a company or making a strategic investment in real estate technology?
The biggest thing is build or buy. So Street Easy is a great example of this. Street Easy launched in New York City specific the same year that Zillow launched. And when we were growing Zillow as a national brand, most homes in the US are single family homes. Zillow was built at a national scale largely in the early days for single family homes. And something we started to learn very early on was like New York City was this really different beast in a lot of ways, in the way data is disseminated, in the relationships between agents, which in New York they call them brokers, and consumers, in the UI challenges for big, tall buildings on a corner where you can have thousands of apartments with different combinations of addresses. And it's like we started to realize a bunch of years in, gosh, if we're ever going to get good at New York City, like we have to carve 30 people off and just go build New York City. And we kept like putting it off and putting it off. And meanwhile, Street Easy was like killing it on New York City because they had 30 or 50 people just focusing on New York City. So there came a point where we said, okay, we're never going to like get around to building New York City. And by the way, Street Easy is doing it really, really well. Let's go talk to them. And it turned into an acquisition. And we because Street Easy had such a great following, we kept the Street Easy brand in New York. So that is our New York City brand.
Hi, Amy. Welcome back to Biscayne as well.
Thank you.
And I had a question more about discipline. I think it's common with well-rounded executives that you will see trading around C-level suite positions. What really prompted you to go from the marketing discipline to the operating discipline?
It's a good question. So a lot of it had to do with our stage as a company and our needs as a company and sort of my desire to expand. So today, just the COO role, half of it's growth and marketing and half of it is really people and operations focused. So our CMO reports to me and I still kind of play in that area some. But I had been CMO or running marketing for a decade. I had really strong people under me that were growing and needed more opportunities. I was looking to add more, and Spencer, our CEO, and I just sort of talked about opportunities, and this was one that expanded. And so like our VP of marketing then became CMO, and one of the things actually I talked about creating a environment where you hire great people who want to stick around. One of the things you have to then do, of course, is grow opportunities for great people to grow into. So a little part of that for me was stepping out of the way for some of my team in the marketing department too.
You talked a lot about culture and being purposeful around what you do with your people. But I break a lot of those things into two pieces. One are sort of the needs you're meeting, like
More in your wet.
Some of the needs that you're meeting, like the work-life balance stuff, maternal leave, pay. But there's also another element, which is creating opportunities, getting people's needs and desires met, helping them understand themselves.
Yeah.
Are you guys doing anything on that sort of next level?
Yeah. I would say we've always been pretty good as a mission-driven company, sort of with that and leadership at some of the top levels. One area that, as our growth exploded, that we realized in the last couple of years we needed to work on was equipping managers at all levels to be great managers. So there was a period of time, actually the last couple of years, where we grew from 1,000 to 3,000 employees, from 100 to 500 people managers. And we had a lot of people who were new people managers. So something we've started doing in the last year and a half is providing a lot of resources for managers to learn how to do their best, and also for managers to identify growth opportunities for their people. Sometimes it's within their org, but sometimes it's way off in another part of the org. And we weren't doing a good job of sort of giving managers the resources or the information to be able to do that. So that's something we're working on. Yeah, yeah. So classes, training, just databases of like jobs in other parts of the company. Hi.
How did you grow with no budget?
The question is, how did you grow with no budget?
So focus on product first, and then build product that people want to talk about, and use free channels like PR, social media, content. So an example of this, there was, of course, the product of the early Zillow website, which at the time was pretty exciting, revolutionary, that you could get a Zestimate value on just about every home in the country and learn all of this information that wasn't previously available. But finding ancillaries to that product too. So I talked about during the housing downturn, creating data reports about what was happening in housing and getting those in front of, this was a big project. We wanted to make sure that anytime anyone talked about housing or real estate, that the Zillow name was attached to it. So we started producing and putting out data, which we would get in the hands of journalists in every city in the country where we had data, but also economists, academics, lawmakers. We took a lot of trips to Washington, and we said, if Congress is putting together legislation around the economy or housing, we want to make sure that they're writing these bills with Zillow data. We want to make sure that when academics are talking about what's happening, that they're talking about Zillow data, and when they're talking to reporters, that it spreads that. So the product in that case was the data reports we built, which then enabled us to use all these organic and free marketing channels. SEO was very important. Also on a product side, mobile was very important, so we embraced mobile really early in that first year an iPhone came out. When was that, like 2008 maybe? 2007, 6? One of those years. We said, well, here's something we noticed. In that first year, we said, let's build an iPhone app and kind of for fun, maybe it's a good branding exercise. Very few people were actually building them. And we built this iPhone app, and even when it first went out, it was really interesting, the behavior we started to see. And we started to see usage patterns that were very, very different from web. It seems kind of like duh now, but back then we had no idea going into it, that we would see these usage patterns on the weekends that just soared up, and we realized, oh my God, people are walking and driving around neighborhoods on this iPhone looking at homes. They're not sitting behind a computer anymore. Wow, what if we could, while they're standing in front of a house, connect them to a real estate agent that could come unlock the door for them and show them? And wouldn't that be valuable to the agent? And so on the product side, we were very early embracers of mobile, which allowed us to become the dominant real estate brand on mobile early on without having to spend a lot of money behind that, but also allowed us to innovate in our business model for a world that was shifting completely mobile. So today, 3/4 of usage on any of our brands are on mobile, as they are on a lot of consumer products, but particularly at real estate, which is a location-based search, and often people want to do this when they're in actual neighborhoods. So that's an example also of putting resources into product. When we first made that revelation, like, oh my gosh, there's a real business here, we immediately took a bunch of people and carved them off on a sort of different floor and said, you're a mobile team. And this was kind of years before companies created mobile teams, right? They would they would hire it out or they would just put one developer to work on that. We were like, okay, let's make a big bet here. Let's take a big swing and assume that this is where the world is going and invest in front of it.
Hi, Amy. Thanks for coming. So my question is, as an end user, when I was moving to Miami, I found Zillow was great for information. And I kind of found it similar to Wikipedia when I was doing research back in college, where it's a great place to start. It's a great place to investigate different areas, look at buildings that I'm interested in. But I found that when I was contacting people who had apartments up for rent, I'd find that a lot of times, maybe 9 out of 10 times, the apartment was no longer available, and then found out that it was just someone trying to get me to look at other apartments and kind of, bamboozling me and trying to get me to look at other things. So how do you combat fake data? How do you combat these
I'm
people
just curious, how long ago was this?
This was recently about 3 months ago, and then
Okay.
prior was about a year ago.
Yeah, so rentals is one of our earlier marketplaces. When I sort of age them out, if real estate is like a young adult, rentals is maybe like preteen. And there are, things we're working through with data sources. One of the hard things is that the sources of rental, what's for sale, is very, very fragmented, right? Some of the biggest sources of rental listings, there's no like MLSs for rentals or brokerages. These are individual mom and pop landlords, truly millions of them across the US. Or they are multifamily buildings that are sort of have this, trying to put out this universal listing when they may not actually have any open, but they want to show you something else. So there's things we're working through. I would say the reason I asked is that in most places it's much better than it used to be. And in addition to that, we've built a lot of really interesting AI that knocks out fraud. And that's something that over the last 18 months has made a tremendous difference. I'm a little surprised it was recently, but there definitely are pockets and places where we're still working on it.
Well, Miami's very good at scamming, I gotta say. No, I mean, personal story, there's been situations where my husband's in real estate, and he was selling my sister's house, and someone had stolen the pictures, put it up for rent, and was trying to get renters to send him money in God knows what country. And some people fell for it, and they think they're renting the place, and you're like, no, that place was never for rent, it's sold. And
yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting problem at scale to eradicate this, right? There's fraud in a lot of places and a lot of industries, and there's really interesting stuff we're learning to do, predictive analytics and AI to take that out. But I mean, this is like the Craigslist story, right? And we didn't want to end up Craigslist and rentals, so getting there. Yep. Okay, so that's a fabulous question, and the answer is no. Do I think we could have, I mean, to be completely honest, today, could we build a new product and not spend $1 on marketing for 7 years? I'm not sure. Because the different element today versus 12 years ago is social and paid social, and that wasn't around then. Could we do it and not spend tens of millions of dollars a year? Yes, but I do think that paid social has kind of changed the game, and it's a pretty necessary element for a lot of brands today. But it's pretty interesting if you have good user data and start to build that out, some of the things you can do.
so now, how has your marketing budget shifted? Now, do you have a
Yeah, so
significant
today
budget?
the way we think about marketing still starts with product. The biggest base of our traffic and users comes from organic channels that build off that product, but we use paid marketing to accelerate growth, and we spend a lot of money. I mean, across our brands, we're well over $100 million a year. We do on the Zillow brand advertising, which I know it's crazy, but like TV still really works. That said, we have all sorts of skunk works trying to figure out for the day that TV stops working, right? Because we know it's coming one of these days. I mean, I don't know. I don't have cable. We live off of Netflix and Apple TV, and I know there are many people like me and many people more going there. But for now, brand advertising and TV still works, and we kind of are working to figure out what happens when it doesn't. But obviously, social, search, mobile acquisition, we have spend in most channels today, but it's just figuring out the right mix and the right mix for each of our brands, which is different.
I stole someone's question. Sorry.
Sorry. Thanks, Amy. I can relate to everything you said about culture, having worked on strategy for an orange-colored home improvement retailer and how we. But I have to ask this question. I think a lot of people might be interested. You mentioned the cutthroat culture at a certain online retailer.
Yeah.
What about Zappos? Their unique way. I know they're owned by the same online retailer. What do you think of that?
You know, I've never known anyone who's actually worked inside Zappos, so I only know what I read. You know, I mean, it's interesting, the whole thing with like no leaders, and I have a hard time understanding with human nature, which is people want to grow and they want recognition, and you know, people want promotions and titles, and it's very, very hard to strip that away and say, no, you shouldn't want that anymore. We're going to be this happy utopian family. But again, like I've never been on the inside and I've never had a real conversation with someone on the inside. It's pretty fascinating. Now, what Zappos does have is they're based in Las Vegas and they're kind of isolated, and you know, if people leave Zappos for an engineering job in Las Vegas, like I don't know where else they're going, right? So would that work in San Francisco? No. Seems to be working for them in Las Vegas. The other thing that maybe you were asking that I think is really interesting is Zappos being acquired by Amazon. Amazon has not touched their culture. So it's working for them, and they've left them alone and they've let them do their thing, which you don't always see in an acquisition. So I mean, that's actually been really pleasing to see that they haven't. They've said, when they bought Zappos, they said this thing you have that's very unique is working for you. We're going to leave it alone, and that is really, really hard often for companies to do. So I totally commend that.
It'll kind of be interesting to see how Walmart affects Jet.com and the same vein.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we have time for one more question. Make it good.
Hi.
Hey, Amy. My name is Miles. Thanks for spending some time with us. And my question would be, what is one of your, I guess, most favorite fails throughout your career, and why?
Oh, gosh. Well, you know, I talked about that I started out as a journalist. And this was something like I wanted to do since I was like 10 years old. I wanted to be an investigative journalist, doing really amazing stories that changed the world. And I studied this, and I this big boon, I got a job right out of school, first for a small NBC station in Virginia, and then my second job was across the state in Naples, Fort Myers, for an ABC station there. I was 22 years old, living in the oldest county in the United States. Truly, like Lee and Charlotte counties are truly the oldest county by demographic in the United States. Wasn't happy for a little bit of that, but the biggest thing was just like the job wasn't what I thought it would be. I wasn't doing anything to change the world. I was standing by the side of the road reporting on car accidents and fires, and it was this big like soul searching where this thing I thought I had always wanted to do, it was all I studied in school. Every single internship I had gotten in college had been, solely based to get me that job, and I got it and I hated it, and I was like, what the hell am I going to do now? That felt like a really big failure. And in the face of that failure was when I took a really huge risk. I quit that job and that career, and I moved to San Francisco. This was late 1999, early 2000. There was this interesting thing happening with the internet and consumer companies with the internet. I knew nothing about the internet. I had never taken a CS class, computer science class, or anything related to that in college. But I knew that all these new companies were sprouting out that needed PR and marketing and needed to get themselves in the news. And hey, I had worked in the news. Maybe I could figure out how to do that for them. So I did, and that sort of was the start on this whole new path of my life that's led me to here. So that was a big failure. But that failure, I don't know, gave me the guts to just say, screw it, I'm going to try something new.
All right, please help me thank Amy.
Thank you for having me.